Welcome back to Crossfire. We now have two new guests joining our discussion of the post-Rabin peace process. Our guests are Hassan Rahman, official PLO representative in Washington, D.C., and Gadi Baltiansky, the press counselor of the Embassy of Israel.
Mr. Baltiansky, Yitzhak Rabin was able to make peace in part because he was regarded as a tough guy. He was the general hero of the Six-Day War and so on. Shimon Peres, the new prime minister, does not have that reputation. Will that make the peace process harder? Will, in fact, this Amir have succeeded in a way of making the peace process harder by having killed Rabin and having tried to kill but failed to kill Peres?
No, the answer is totally negative. It's not only Mr. Rabin did this peace, but it's the Israeli nation. And Mr. Peres is highly committed to the peace process, as you all know. I think an idea, it's much stronger than its beholder. An ideology lives much longer than the people that believe in this ideology or even created it. Most of the Israelis support the peace process, and they will support the new government headed by Shimon Peres on its way to peace.
Hassan Rahman, the assassination of Mr. Sadat, the assassination of Mr. Rabin certainly show it's awfully risky to be a peacemaker in the region. Is there going to be any negative feelings on the part of any of the Arab leaders to continue to participate out of fear or of the process?
No, I believe most of the Arab leaders are veterans. I mean, you know, whether it is Hosni Mubarak, King Hussein, or Yasser Arafat, and they have been through a great deal in their lives. I don't think that an event like this will dissuade them from the course that they have decided to take, and that's the course of peace.
Then why don't the extremists understand that and focus on a different approach in trying to influence the process?
Well, you know, I guess you asked this question to the extremists. Don't they just catalyze the positive? Don't they catalyze a backlash against their cause? I think what we should ask is what would be our role vis-a-vis the extremists. We have to do two things. One is to show that they cannot succeed by we ourselves succeeding in what we are trying to do. I believe that the response to Yigal Amir and the likes of Yigal Amir and the Mr. Leiter who spoke before us is that we have to show them that what we are embarking on is a process that will transform our region to the better of the two peoples, the Israelis and the Arabs.
Mr. Baltiansky, one of the keys to getting this process continued to move is to have a much more effective policy towards dealing with the settlers issue. They are certainly at the crux of the problem. They are creating a climate which is very negative, and they also are physically, in many cases, obstructing the process. Do you think there's going to be a change in approach under the Peres leadership?
Well, first of all, the reality is complicated. I mean, the fact that settlers are living near the Arabs in the same towns, almost as neighbors in the same villages, is complicated. Now, you have to deal with it with a lot of sensitivity. I think that most of the settlers are people that want peace, that cried today with the rest of the Israeli nation because of the loss of Prime Minister Rabin. But there are some fringe elements among those settlers that they act like a virus in a society. And we have to learn how to deal with this virus.
Will there be less sympathy, though, for the settlers in cases of, if it comes down to the question of their being removed, in order to redraw the lines between the Jews and the Arabs, because of this assassination, do you think?
I don't think that this assassination will change political opinion in Israelis' minds. But we should draw the right conclusions of this assassination, and we should lower the rhetorics maybe, and we should treat our leaders as human beings, as not as beasts, as some elements among the settlers did in the last couple of years. I think that the question of the settlements will be resolved in the negotiations with our Palestinian partners, and I'm more than convinced that most of the settlers will accept the decision taken by the democratically elected government.
Mr. Baltiansky, how does the process cope with the election cycle that is now imposed into the system and the timing?
We're speaking a lot of the peace process, you know, and we got into the stage that I think that there is more of a peace and less than a process, and it's a good sign. We have peace with our neighbors, with our Egyptian neighbors, with our Jordanian neighbors. We are very much involved in agreements now with the Palestinians. We are now beginning the implementation of the last agreement that we signed with the Palestinians. So I'm really convinced that there's not so much to negotiate in the next few months, unless we will see a change in the Syrian attitude.
Mr. Rahman, why didn't Yasser Arafat attend the funeral?
Well, I believe for good reasons. His presence would be very controversial, and we wanted to avoid...
With whom?
Well, with some of the Israelis, I'm sure, who would not like the idea of having Yasser Arafat there, and we wanted to avoid any contention, any rising intentions. But if you allow me, I want to go back to the question of the settlers, really, because I believe that they are the most difficult and complicated issue that will face our relations with the Israelis. Because settlers, yes, there may be settlers there who would abide by the decisions of the Israeli government. But the kind of settlers who live very close to the Arabs are the kind who are opposed to coexistence with the Arabs. And therefore, I think what needed from the Israeli government is to take a very, very strong decision on the question of the settlers, and a courageous one.
But Mr. Rahman, there are people on your side, too, who are irredentists, as the phrase goes, who don't accept the peace, don't accept the progress of the peace. There were people who were cheering the death of Yitzhak Rabin on Palestinian television.
Yes, I know. We have extremists on our side, but there are extremists on every side. There are Israeli extremists and there are Palestinian extremists. The question, as I posed it in the beginning, how do we deal with those people? From our side, we are dealing with our extremists, and we are bent on bringing them under control.
What are you doing?
We are doing what we need to do.
Well,
those who oppose the law have to be punished, and those who abide by the law, they are most welcome into the political fold.
Mr. Baltiansky, let me go back to the election cycle. Is there any, you're saying there is no possibility at all, the concern about the election cycle will delay implementation of the agreements already signed by Mr. Rabin?
Right. I think that the agreement signed with the PLO will be implemented.
And on the same quick timetable that
exactly. There will be no delay whatsoever in the implementation of the agreement.
What did Mr. Netanyahu mean, the head of the Likud, the opposition party, when he said today, I believe, he supports the peace process? Because he certainly hasn't supported the peace process all along. Do you think he's changing, or is that just words for the occasion?
I'm not sure that he changed his view. I will be very much surprised. I think that he said that he supports a peace process because he is against the war process. And I think you will find all Israelis supporting a peace process. This specific peace process is supported by a majority of the Israelis. I'm not sure that Mr. Netanyahu is included in that.
Let me take the opposite tack. Is there any special opportunities as a result of this tragedy that both sides should look to take advantage of now?
Well, first of all, the death of Mr. Rabin is a tragic event. There's no doubt about that. But sometimes something good may come out of a tragedy like this, and that is determination by the two peoples to forge ahead with the peace process.
On that hopeful note, I've got to cut you off. Thanks, Mr. Rahman. Thank you, Mr. Baltieri. John and I will be back in a couple of minutes.
Michael, as both our guests acknowledge, the settlers' issue is both the hardest and most complex, and certainly the revolution from the settlement issue set the negative climate that created the tragedy that we saw this weekend. How they handle it is certainly going to be the key, not only through the election cycle, but it is the go, no go, make or break situation in the whole peace process.
As one of the guests suggested, I believe Mr. Baltieri, there are most of the settlers are so-called settlers, or people who've just chosen to live in areas, some of which will always be part of Israel, and some of which they might have to relocate. I don't think they'll object to that. It's just a small core, the so-called settlers movement, that's making trouble. And I think one thing that may come out of this tragedy is a lot less tolerance in the Israeli population at large for them and letting them get in the way of the peace.
You know, that's the kind of thing I was referring to, that sometimes that those that promote terror get a backlash against their cause, which in the long run moves things forward in the right direction. Let's hope that that's the legacy of this tragedy.
From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
And from the right, I'm John Sununu. Join us again tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.